Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 22nd of March of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to start with the Donbass Frontline. We're going to discuss the line between Avdiivka and Bakhmut. This is one of the most important line. This is one of the most important combat line in this special operation, and the results of these clashes of the battle for this line will determine the entire situation in Ukraine for the next 6 months, I believe so. The Russians are saying that during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost around 300 soldiers, 6 armored vehicles and 2 artillery systems. And this is the highest level of the losses since the beginning of the March. The last time when the Russians reported about such a high losses dated on the 4th of March. And the Russians are saying that on the 4th of March, the Ukrainians lost 490 soldiers, 17 armored vehicles, including 1 tank and so on. So as you can see, and when we are talking about the 4th of March, we can say that that was the first day when the Russians confirmed or reported that there was an first encirclement of Bakhmut, or let's say that on the 4th of March the Russians reported or first mentioned about some kind of operational encirclement of Bakhmut. Within those days the Ukrainians lost Dubovo, Vasilievka, Berkhovka, and that was the reason of such a heavy losses at the beginning of the March. Furthermore, during the next few days after 4th of March, the Russians mentioned for the first time of establishing control over small village Vysyola. So there was like two kind of attacks, two directions of attack in the north of Avdiivka and in the north of Bakhmut, and as a result of those clashes dated on the 4th of March, the Ukrainians lost 490 soldiers. And today the Russians are saying that Ukrainians lost 300 soldiers, so this also very heavy losses from the Ukrainian side. If you remember, the previous days we discussed about some kind of operational pause, and we discussed that I expect that within the next few days the Russians are going to reactivate their push, their final rush, and now we are the witnesses of this situation. Now let's talk in more details about Bakhmut. Today the Russians are saying this map is updated. As you can see, there are a lot of icons in this area. As you can see, the Russians are saying that as a result of clashes during the previous days, they managed to establish control for more than 63% of entire Bakhmut. Also, the Russians are saying that Ukrainians controls just 16% of Bakhmut, of western part of Bakhmut, we can say. And they're also saying that there is around 20% of the gray zone inside Bakhmut. So let's return back to the Western sources map and let's update this map according to this information we have. So we understand that Ukrainians, of course, tries to control the entrance inside the western part, and there are at least few roads or few bridges that leads to the western part of Bakhmut. The north one, there are 3 bridges on the west side, and there are on the central part, and there are no, of course, bridges on the south. So we can say that by this evening the Ukrainians controls something like this. So it's like obvious control, 100% control over this territory, and the territory between let's say the red cloud and blue cloud is the gray zone. And the south one, the central part, the north one, the Russians are saying that they have completed clearing operation on the north, and there are clashes on the south, and it is very difficult for the Ukrainians to keep their soldiers in the middle and the central part. So blue cloud is 100% area that still remains under Ukrainian control. The rest of Bakhmut is or under Russian control or in the gray zone. Furthermore, today the Ukrainians published another video of how they were their trip between Chasov Yar and Bakhmut. There is a video of that, and there was a lot of destroyed vehicles along the road and so on. When talking about the south area, the Russians reactivated their offensive operation in the direction of Ivanovska. When talking about the deployment map, we can see that there are a lot of brigades were redeployed inside Bakhmut. And as we understand, the Ukrainians are not planning to give up. I think that they don't have any other options. They have a lot of problems in Avdiivka, but we see that they took a decision to fight. Furthermore, as you know, today Zelensky visited Chasov Yar. This is the area where Zelensky visited this time. town, this industrial zone on the north of Chasov Yar, and he, I believe he wanted to support the Ukrainians because, as I understand, this visit is something like that Ukrainians took a decision to fight, and this was like the final step, the final preparation before the Ukrainian greatest unblocking operation of Bakhmut. But the Russian sources are saying, they're joking, that this is a very bad sign for the Ukrainians, because the last time when Zelensky visited Bakhmut, he visited the industrial zone in the north, and within a month, less than in a month, the Russians established control over the northern part, over this area where Zelensky made the meeting instead of Bakhmut. And they're saying that now it's time to take control over the north part of Chasov Yar. So for the Ukrainians, according to the Russians, it's a very bad sign. Let's return back to the deployment map, and you see that there are a lot of brigades in the vicinity of Bakhmut. From the north part, there are a lot of mechanized brigades, tank brigades. Furthermore, the Ukrainians moved up to 5 artillery brigades in the vicinity of Slaviansk, Kramatorsk, Bakhmut agglomeration to support the Ukrainian counteroffensive operation. There is a 45th Artillery Brigade, there is a 43rd, there is a 107th Rockets Artillery Brigade, and there is some kind of strategical reserves of 26th Artillery Brigade and 40th Artillery Brigade. Furthermore, don't forget that there are some parts of 55th Artillery Brigade and so on. So the Ukrainians are ready. But the thing is that is not ready is the weather, because the weather is very bad. The quality of the ground is very poor, but the Ukrainians don't have any other option. They're losing Bakhmut. And there are not much territory left. And the thing is that as soon as the Russians are able to establish control over this central part of Bakhmut, then the situation will be completely in Russian favor. And after that, the Ukrainians is the party who are no longer able to push the Russians back from the Bakhmut. It's not just enough to unblock Bakhmut. There are a lot of soldiers inside this town, and they don't have possibilities to evacuate from this town, because, as we discussed, if they take a decision to evacuate at once, the losses will be very heavy. Maybe even more than 50% of the manpower they would lose if they take a decision to run away from this town. So, and 20,000 army is a very pretty big army. And if we try to calculate 50%, I believe that if the Ukrainians are going to make a very stupid decision, they can lose within a month, just as a result of a stupid decision, up to 10,000 soldiers. Furthermore, we need to understand about other losses on other front lines, like in Bogdanovka, in the vicinity of Grigorievka, Orekhovo, Vasilievka. So according to my understanding of this situation, the battle to unblock Bakhmut is not going to take a lot of time. We are not going to see like another like few months of battle to unblock Bakhmut. This is going to be 4-5 days operation, and then we are going to understand whether the Ukrainians are able to unblock Bakhmut or they are not ready to unblock Bakhmut. Something tells me that there's going to be a small deal between Russians and Ukrainians, because to tell the truth, from the Ukrainian side, this is suicide operation, and we understand that both understand that this is going to be disaster for both sides, and the Russians can be defeated and they can have heavy losses, and the Ukrainians can be defeated and they can have multiple losses in comparison with the Russians, and everybody understand that the risks are very high. But so that's why I think that there are going to be some kind of clashes, some kind of unblocking operation, and after that, the Russians, after some clashes, after some blood would be spilled, the Russians maybe will allow the Ukrainians to evacuate or to move their forces from Bakhmut, but only after a few days of battles, or maybe not. This is completely speculation from my side. Maybe now this is no time for discussions and negotiation process. Maybe it's time to reduce and to break the situation entirely. So I'm just trying to say from my perspective that it's always casualties among people. No matter that they're soldiers, they're also people that have family. So of course, from my side, I just want this situation to be resolved, and with losses, with level of losses from both sides. But I think that maybe it's even impossible. Maybe we're going to see the bloodiest battle of the 21st century, and this result is going to be unpredictable, and this can turn the entire situation in Ukraine. So one more time, the Russians complete this clearing operation of the central part, and then they're going to start clearing operation of the western part. What the Ukrainians are going to do, they will establish their control over the few points as we discussed. The western one, this is the main fortress that Ukrainians are going to use, because using this they can support and they can supply forces and not to allow to collapse the entire front line. And of course this north one, this one. And it's not just because of, first of all, geographical reason, and the second one is the high buildings in this area. And I believe that maybe even by the end of this week the Ukrainians will take a decision even to leave the central part of Bakhmut, not from strategical perspective but from understanding that it is much more easier to defend their forces just on the western part of Bakhmut, and the central part of Bakhmut will be the Ukrainians will leave the central part. And from the other side, it is a very nice benefit for the Russians, because as you can see, Bakhmut is not so big. But anyway, for example, even according to this map, we see that the length of the front line that the Russians need to keep around Bakhmut is more than around 20 kilometers, and the length of the Ukrainian front line is less, maybe 3 times less. So for them it is much more easier to defend their side. So that's why the Russians need to take control of the central part to short the front line and to push and to redeploy the released forces, let's say, to the north, because the Russians understand that soon the Ukrainians are going to start their greatest unblocking operation, and the main direction of their attack is going to be the north, on the line between Vasikovka and Bogdanovka, this one, because tanks are just the only force that are able to penetrate area with support of artillery. Furthermore, we understand that the tanks, Western tanks, are already on the ground, on the Ukrainian ground. I still haven't received any photo or video confirmation that these tanks, or at least some tanks on the are already in the vicinity of Bakhmut, but I suppose that this is going to be a surprise for the Russians. I believe that if the Ukrainians have already calculated everything, if they understand that yes, there is a high chances to penetrate and to push the Russians back, of course they will do this using Leopards, of course, or Challengers, because they need not just a victory. They need a victory, and they need to show the base why we managed to do this, what helped us to penetrate the Russians and to push them back. And of course they will create a legend that about the Leopards, about Challengers, that these are so powerful tanks that they helped us to solve the issue on the north of Bakhmut, is going to be a media part of that attack. So I believe that we are going to see these Challengers, but from the other side there's a very risk for the Ukrainians and the Western countries, because if the Russians are able to defeat and repulse the Ukrainians' attacks, from the other side we can find another legend that, let's say, Leopards and Challengers are not immortal, and it's not a very big deal to destroy these tanks. Very interesting situation. I believe we are going to see a lot of surprises. And one more time, Zelensky visited Chasov Yar, and that was like something like a final point. So he came in direction inside of Chasov Yar to bless their forces before the greatest unblocking operation. It was some kind of bless before the final battle. So maybe even tomorrow in the morning we're going to see the beginning of the movement. And the only question we can ask ourselves right now, whether the Wagnerians are able or ready to meet their enemy and to give them a real battle, to show them everything they can and to show them what they can do. And now let's move to the Avdiivka one more time. The Ministry of Defense reported about the level of the losses, but they didn't mention the area where exactly they were attacking. So that means that we can split these losses among these two front lines. As you can see, there are also a lot of icons in this area. The Russians reported about some losses among their very famous officers on the ground. They're saying that some officer, Sergeant Phoenix, was killed somewhere in the vicinity of Toninka and Severna. Also, the Russians published a photo of some smoke. As you can see, there is a smoke in this area. This one is smoke above Toninka, and then they're going to show another smoke. This is the smoke that goes from Avdiivka. So these two areas where the Russians are pushing and trying to attack. As we discussed, they need to suppress and pin down the Ukrainians inside of this small, let's say, Avdiivka Ugledar block, and they need to continue pushing in direction of Severna and Toninka. They need to close the cauldron, and from the north, you can see there is another icon showing that the Russians have some advances, some deployment developments in the vicinity of Krasnogorovka in direction of Stepovo and Berdichi. If we take a look at the Western sources map, the Ukrainians reported that during the previous 24 hours they managed to repulse attacks in direction of Stepovo, Berdichi, Severna, and the most important, that the Russians started their movement from Bakhmutovka and Krasnogorovka in direction of Keramik. I don't think that this is some kind of a real offensive operation. This is just a regular pin-down support operation of the Russian forces who moves in direction of Orlovka. So it's just a regular checkmate. So that means that the strategical or tactical, not even tactical, yes, operational and tactical reserves the Ukrainians have in the town by the name of Achertina. And from this area there are two roads. One of them goes to the south in direction of Berdych and another one goes to Keramik. So this is the area where the Ukrainians deploy their operational reserves. So that's why the Russians have two directions of their attack, in direction of Keramik and of course in direction of Berdych. And the reason is that one of these attacks is a fake attack and another one is a real attack. And the fake attack, the main purpose of the fake attack is to force the Ukrainians to move their forces and to freeze their reserves and not to allow the Ukrainians to be mobile, because we know that Ukrainians have a lot of problems with the reserves. Let's return back to the deployment map and you're gonna see that one more time. This is Bakhmut. There's like dozens of brigades in this area, and let's take a look at Avdiivka. Just a few brigades, 110th Mechanized Brigade that were under very heavy fire since the beginning of this year. They lost a lot of ammo depots. The Russians reported about destroying headquarters, about forces destroyment, and so on. When we are talking about this small cauldron, there are 17 separate infantry battalion. There is some kind of special police forces regiment. There is a 53rd Mechanized Brigade that were damaged much, but this completely fresh brigade. They were deployed just at the end of February, so they're less than a month in this area. There is a 36th Marine Corps Brigade that were deployed also recently on the 12th of March, so they also have some manpower. They have also some blood to spill. And there are some forces, 59th Motorized Brigade in the vicinity of Nivolska, but there is these forces, I believe they controls just Nivolska. I believe that there are some groups of this brigade were deployed somewhere here, but anyway, we're talking about the lack of reserves and lack of forces in this area. So the Ukrainians have very limited resources in the vicinity of Avdiivka, but the push from the Russian side is very heavy. It's very heavy. Furthermore, if you take a look at this map, deployment map, you won't find even a single artillery brigade in this area. I'm not saying that the information that is provided by the deployment map is correct. Of course, there should be some changes and differences with the real situation, but at least this map can show us the navigation or direction to think. So I believe that there are artillery systems, there are some. Furthermore, if you take a look at Ugledar, there are at least two brigades, 55th and 15th Artillery Brigade, and I believe that the Ukrainians are able to move some parts in direction of Avdiivka. But anyway, this is completely different situation in comparison with Bakhmut. 5 brigades in the vicinity of Bakhmut, and let's say zero brigade in the vicinity of Avdiivka. And the Russians are saying that Ukrainians took a decision. They took the most important decision. As we discussed, if you remember, I told you that now it's not the question of whether the Ukrainians are able to hold Avdiivka or Bakhmut or not. Now the most important question that the Russians want to answer to the question the Russians want to receive, which reserves the Ukrainians are going to use to save the situation, to save themselves, to save their armies, and to solve the issues about these troubles and terrible catastrophe situation in Avdiivka and Bakhmut. And some Russian sources are saying that Ukrainians took a decision to move reserves from Kremenaya, Frontline, from Kupiansk, from this area, from Kremenaya, from Kupiansk, so from Liman Frontline, from this area. And if you remember, we discussed that as soon as the Ukrainians start moving some reserves, the Russians will check this and they will start their push exactly in the area where they see that Ukrainians has the weakest position. So as we understand, the Ukrainians took a decision to pay for to save the situation with the forces from Kremenaya. And this is maybe the reason why the Ukrainians took a decision to prepare this defense line along Zherebets River, because they understand, they analyze, calculate it, and they understand that maybe it's time to leave this bank of the river because of heavy losses, because of everything. Maybe they think that then they will be able to return back and so on. So I believe that if the Ukrainians took a decision to take their forces from Kremenaya in direction of Avdiivka and Bakhmut, that means that soon the Russians are able to take entire area, and maybe we are going to see a third battle for Liman one more time. Furthermore, when talking about Liman Frontline, the Russians are saying that as a result of clashes, the Ukrainians lost just 90 soldiers, 5 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems. As you can see, the level of Ukrainian losses also have been reduced in this area, and maybe that means that they have already started evacuation process, and maybe this is the reason why the Russians can't also get them and run after them, because they need to be very smart things to do. They need to not to hurry up, and they need to be just to take their time and not to risk, because if they start running after Ukrainians, they can get inside the many traps, and they can lose more than even Ukrainians while doing the stupid decision while trying to get the Ukrainians. So Bakhmut and Avdiivka. Now let's return back in this area. So now this, as we discussed, this square these days is one of the most important. And if the Russians are able to reduce or somehow to take control over this area and to develop their bridgehead, to establish control, fire, artillery, physical control over these roads, then Avdiivka is going to fall. Maybe the Ukrainians have another plan. Maybe they think, as we discussed at the beginning of this video, that, as I told you, that as I understand, according to my understanding of the situation, the unblocking battle for Bakhmut is not going to take months, like 2 or 3 or something like this. It's going to be a very short battle, fast and short battle. The Ukrainians need to show what they can using the Western weapon, and they have maybe just 4 or 5 days to complete this unblocking battle. And if they need more time, this is going to be a disaster, and they will be defeated 100%. They don't have much time. They have just a very short period of time to complete this mission and there are 2 purposes. The best achievements that Ukrainians are able to get as a result of unblocking Bakhmut is to push the Russians on, let's say, on the east side of Bakhmut River. This is like the perfect solution for the Ukrainians. If they're able to do this, then they will move their forces, build another trenches, fortifications, and they will freeze this front line for many months. And it's like the best ending of this operation. Normal ending of this operation that still fits the Ukrainian requirements is to unblock the forces and to evacuate this 10-20,000 army from this area. This is also appropriate solution for them. It's normal with them. And the worst situation if the Ukrainians will be defeated. So that's why they need, and they understand that 5 days is enough to complete, because the weather was bad. The Russians, I don't think that the Russians had enough of time to prepare significant fortifications in this area. Yes, there are trenches. Yeah, there are some fortifications. The old Ukrainian fortification, if you remember, during the battle for Solidar, the Ukrainians prepared some trenches on the west side of Solidar, and I believe that now the Russians control these trenches, and there are many other trenches that were prepared by the Ukrainians that now under Russian control. So there are some background and there are some infrastructure that the Russians can use against that attack, but there are no powerful fortification as we can see, let's say, in the same Avdiivka. And these 5 days, and the main goal, the main job that forces of Ukrainians in Avdiivka should do is to hold for these 5 days and not to be collapsed or encircled within the next 5 days while the Ukrainians would try to unblock Bakhmut. And the thing is that it's very risky. It's like a game in poker. I don't know. The Ukrainians took a decision to put everything they have and to rely on the luck. I can't explain. Don't have any other words. The Ukrainians took a decision to rely just on luck in the Battle of Bakhmut, because if they will be defeated, they will lose both, and Avdiivka and Bakhmut. But if they can win, they can save both towns, because after 5 days of this short battle for Bakhmut, they will send their reserves to Avdiivka and they will start their counter-offensive operation, of course, and they will try to push the Ukrainians in this area, trying to return back over Krasnogorovka, Novobakhmutovka, maybe even more, because as we discussed that Krasnogorovka used to be under Russian control, but if the Ukrainians are able to accumulate enough of power and to make a rush, of course the Russians will be forced to step back. So Bakhmut can determine a lot during the special operation. And the final thing, that if the Ukrainians loses Bakhmut, they will lose Bakhmut, they will lose Avdiivka, and possibly the Ukrainians will lose Kremenaya, Bridgehead, and maybe even Liman. So a lot of things. This is a very high price for this battle, very high. Now let's move further to other front lines and other events on the front lines. The Russians are saying that as a result of clashes on Zaporozhye, Kherson and South Donetsk area, the Ukrainians lost 60 soldiers, 5 armored vehicles and 2 artillery systems. As you can see, Zaporozhye, there are very heavy artillery duels. And the thing is that there are a lot of soldiers from both sides, from the Russian and from the Ukrainians. I don't think that there are going to be any counter-offensive operation from any side, neither from the Russians or the Ukrainians. And the thing is that these artillery duels just showing that we are here. Both sides are saying that we are here, we have a lot of power, and don't even try to do anything. And so this is just something like escalation of the situation on this front line, while the real situation goes somewhere in Bakhmut and Avdiivka. The Russians are saying that these days they continue attacking Zaporozhye with missiles, and today the Russians or the Ukrainian sources published another video. For now, nobody knows about the reason of whose rocket was this. The Russians haven't provided any information, the Ukrainians as well, but as you can see, as a result of this missile attack, a part of the building was ruined immediately. Of course, we remember that in the same area few months ago, but on the other bank of the Zaporozhye river, somewhere in this area, the Ukrainians anti-air defense system launched their missiles, but then these missiles was, I don't know, something happened wrong with this missile, and as a result of the attack, the Ukrainians destroyed their own residential building inside of Zaporozhye. So maybe this is another case of failed air defense work inside of Zaporozhye. Very difficult to determine. I believe that soon we're going to receive more information about that. When talking about Kherson, the same situation in Zaporozhye. Very heavy artillery duels with one purpose: not even try to do anything. The Ukrainians are attacking this bank of the river, but this is very interesting attack. As you can see, they're attacking the Russians all over the bank of the river, so we can say that maybe it's some kind of artillery preparation. Maybe the Ukrainians would try to make another attempt to cross Dnipro river and to establish bridgehead on this side of the river. Who knows? But as we discussed, Kherson is very interesting, and I'm paying attention to this area because I believe that this year something is going to happen, and something tells me that the Russians will return back Kherson. I don't know why, but it's complete speculation and just the feelings, nothing more. And of course, when talking about Kupiansk, nothing has been changed, just the thing that Ukrainians took a decision to use Kupiansk Kremenaya reserves to stop their tragedy or disaster in the vicinity of Bakhmut and Avdiivka. So this is the situation, and also there are small piece information from Sever's front line. The Russians activated in direction of Razdolovka, and possibly this is the reason. This is the operation of Wagnerians, of course, and maybe this is the reason why the Russian, the same situation. The Ukrainians took a decision to move the reserves from Kremenaya front line, and we can say that Seversk belongs to Kremenaya front line. So this is the group of Ukrainian army who is responsible for this front line. And if the Ukrainians took a decision to move the reserve from this area, so this is the reason why the Russians took a decision to increase the pressure in this area as well. So just to pin down and not to allow the Ukrainians to be flexible and mobile, and not to allow them to move reserves from this area to Bakhmut. So everything is complicated. The real war has started, and the results of these battles is unpredictable. Very difficult to understand how this situation is going to be finished. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.